Hello, everyone. I am Suhasini, as I've already been introduced. Today, I'm representing Art Deco Mumbai Trust to talk a bit about the documentation process we have found to be useful since our inception in 2016. I'd like to thank Ishita, of course, for this kind invitation. I think it's also given us a chance to introspect and think about the work that we've been producing. Thank you also to the participants for being here, and I hope that something from our experience is useful for some of your projects. Let me quickly take you through the presentation structure that I have in place today. I'll talk a little bit about Art Deco Mumbai, the work that we do and our objectives. And then I'll spend a little time talking about the importance of photo documentation before I go into the actual practice that we have in place. Our practice is largely divided into two halves. First is fieldwork, which includes recceing neighborhoods, creating the base map, and the actual process of photo documentation. And the second half is what we gather on field and how it's processed once you're back in the office and back on desk. Of course, any documentation process is not without its challenges, so I'll spend a little time talking about that, our ongoing documentation, and our experience in general of documenting Mumbai's modern heritage. So we were founded in 2016 with just a social media presence, with the objective of creating the first and only archive of Mumbai's modern living heritage. Mumbai has an unparalleled density of the Art Deco style of architecture, which is a modern import of the 1930s. It began in Europe, traveled to Americas, and this is also a time where international borders are sort of opening up. So there is through trade, and of course, because Mumbai is a port city, this style was very, very easily adopted in the city. Now, popular opinion dictates that it's Miami that holds the pride of place of having the largest density of Art Deco in the world. But our documentation actually challenges that number. And we have found that Bombay has, if not more, but then just as many Art Deco structures as Miami. Now, of course, this is not a numbers game or any kind of petty competition, but I bring this up to draw attention to the importance of documentation, to even begin to understand the sheer density of this style prevalent in the city. You know, it's an important part of Bombay's history to sort of acknowledge that the city embraced a certain architectural style so wholeheartedly, you know, because it's not just about architecture, but also the kind of lifestyle that architecture brought about. And without acknowledging this, the history of Bombay from the 1930s to the 1950s would be incomplete. Through this documentation, we have also been able to create a single online directory that offers a unified inventory of Art Deco buildings in the city. This is the inventory that I speak of. It's an online map that you can find on our website. Since ours is a public domain archive, the idea is to allow citizens of the city or anyone with an internet connection, basically, to be able to navigate their city and its Art Deco. And this inventory, you can filter this map by location, by Art Deco elements, and by various architectural features, like, say, balconies or grills or railings. And even if you cannot visit the property physically, the inventory will show you a wide variety of images. It'll show you various angles that highlight the Art Deco-ness of a certain structure. If you look at the map on your screen, there's a whole list of neighborhoods. These are all the neighborhoods that we have documented and is part of our inventory, and this list keeps increasing. And the idea is to make this accessible. So it works it's almost like a pocket map that you can take and explore the Art Deco structures in the city. You don't need our help. You don't need anyone's help. You just need your cell phone to be able to navigate the city. Our organization is built on 4 main pillars. The first is research, which I don't think I need to explain to this audience. Then is documentation, which is the thrust of today's talk, and I'll come back to that later. We have outreach, which is putting that research and all the work that we've been doing out there through, say, social media, through webinars, through public lectures. We also host walking tours, guided tours in the city. And advocacy, which is advocating for the conservation and chronicling the history of Bombay's Art Deco. Now, since this presentation is about documentation, let me dive into that. Now, what is the importance of photo documentation? Why should we photo document? I think there is no other way to conserve. And like Ishita said at the beginning, this is also an important way to be able to preserve our existing modern living heritage. Documentation, I think, is an essential first step towards any conversation about conservation. What is worth conserving and what isn't is all secondary without an assessment, a physical assessment of the built form. You don't know what the density of the style is in the city. You don't know the precarity of the form. You don't know the degree of intervention that might be required to preserve a certain structure. And without this kind of documentation, you don't understand the historical significance of a certain structure. The image that you see on the left is a building called Shanti Kunj in Malad. Now, as you can see, the facade is completely weathered. It's discolored, it's blackened over the years because of being exposed to Bombay's monsoon. But during our documentation, we were able to spot what may have been the original colors of the building. And the image that you see on your right is a creative render, which is our take of what the building may have looked like in its original form, based on the little information that we could gather during the documentation process. Now, this is a creative process that Art Deco Mumbai doesn't have any trademark or authority over. Anyone in the city can engage with their built environment similarly. Think about what the original colors of the building may have been like, what the life of the building has been like. These are all like creative queries that you can engage with. You don't have to be an architect. You don't have to have any technical photography skills. You just need to be able to observe what is around you. And I think it's documentation, this very, very technical process of documentation that opens up these other creative avenues, not just for us, but for all the people that we're putting our work out there for. This is a map of the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensembles, which became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018. All the buildings dotted in the red are Art Deco, and as a part of the ensemble, they enjoy certain protections. Many of you may know about the Coastal Road project that's taking place in Bombay at the moment, which is going to connect marine lines in the south all the way to Kandivali in the western suburbs. Now, this infrastructural project is actually eating into the entire promenade that extends up to Chowpatty Beach. And anyone who's even familiar with Bombay cinema knows that this stretch is the most enduring image of Bombay. Any film that is situated in Bombay, these are the first images that you see on screen. It's something that you immediately identify with the city of Bombay. And unfortunately, it's under threat because of this developmental project. But since Marine Drive enjoys protection under the UNESCO inscription, this developmental project was compelled to shift by a few feet, and it starts a little ahead. And Marine Drive and the Art Deco buildings along that stretch were protected because of the UNESCO nomination. And now I think that is the power of documentation. Through documentation, the stakeholders that were involved in this nomination were able to bring attention to these living heritage structures and advocate for their protection. But having said that, Art Deco in Bombay goes much beyond the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensemble. In fact, our documentation has proven that there is a significantly larger collection of Art Deco buildings in the northern part of the city, the less glamorous part of the city, which you don't see in films, as compared to South Bombay, especially in the neighborhoods of Dadar and Matunga. As I was saying earlier, the thrust of the claim about the density of Bombay's Art Deco is recognizing that the style percolates much beyond the island city. It may have started in Oval Maidan for those familiar with Bombay's history of reclamation. Oval Maidan was the first Art Deco district in the city, but through our detailed documentation, we have found that we were able to spot Deco across the city's north and south axis. So on this map, you can see it starts in Kolaba, there's Oval Maidan, Marine Drive. Kambala Hill has a lot of Art Deco style bungalows. Dadar and Matunga, incidentally, are one of the first planned suburbs in Bombay, which also came up in the 1930s. And the Art Deco style was the chosen style for the low-rise apartments that came up in the city at the time, which was essentially the answer to the crisis of space in the city, because of course, Bombay's always had a problem of population explosion, because it's attracted so many people for various opportunities since its inception. Now, we've discovered that Art Deco is an extremely versatile form. you will see imageries of almost every major practiced faith in Bombay represented through the Art Deco style. We've spotted the lotus, the swastik, the Hamza sign, the crescent moon, or even Parsi farohas represented in the Art Deco style. We've also been able to identify material that little was known about before. For example, color creep, which is a colored concrete, which became famous in the 1930s and 40s. And through our documentation and adjacent research, which our documentation led us to, we were able to discover technical details like this. Documentation has also allowed us to explore interesting threads of urban histories of the development of neighborhoods. So for example, we've spotted Art Deco across typologies as well. Of course, they're apartment buildings, but they're also public buildings, they're insurance buildings, they're banks, there are high schools. The Ismail Beg Mohammed High School in Mohammed Ali Road is in a beautiful Art Deco style. There's Don Bosco High School in Matunga. There are several Parsi Agyaris in the Art Deco style. And hospitals, Breach Candy Hospital, which some of you may know, was where Amitabh Bachchan was famously admitted when during his coolie accident. That's an Art Deco hospital. So through architecture, I think we can begin to talk about the city's urban culture. Our focus isn't simply on architecture, but the various queries that it sort of leads us to. It leads us to talk about the city's urban culture, its cosmopolitanism, how an infrastructural development like the reclamation or the suburban development in Matunga, for instance, has impacted the city's culture. Documentation forms the basis of several of those adjacent research queries. You may discover a factoid while you're doing documentation, while you're speaking to somebody in a certain neighborhood that you're documenting, and something from their personal narrative or some factoid that they might know which you're not aware of will lead you to larger explorations. So let me go into the actual technical process of how we go about doing our documentation. The first half, as I said, was field work. And under field work, the first thing we do is recceing the neighborhood. Now, the thrust of the exercise here is not simply to identify which ones are the Art Deco built forms in a certain neighborhood, but to also understand the formations of, say, communities and the socio-cultural context in which a certain neighborhood emerged in. And to do this, very often we will find a resource in a neighborhood, an old-time resident, for instance, who becomes our point of contact, and their oral histories become very important for our documentation for any given neighborhood. In our experience, people have been extremely forthcoming. In fact, there was a lady in Juhu East who wrote to us recently about her mother, who spent most of her life in an Art Deco bungalow, which is now slated for redevelopment. But her mother's now in her 90s, and this is essentially a very, very private family. But she reached out to us, and she wanted her mother's oral history to be recorded. So it isn't just about the tangible built form, but it's also associated and linked so intrinsically with people's familial histories and their experience of the city itself. The next step is to create a base map with a zone boundary. The map that you see on your screen is a zoomed out Google map of what we have identified, of a neighborhood we've identified within Matunga. The red dots that you see on your screen is the outer boundary within which the documentation for this zone will take place. And as the process moves forward, this map becomes more detailed and is layered with more information. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll take you through how this map will evolve. We've identified this as Zone 3A in Matunga. That's the name given to this zone. Now, the same map that you saw in the previous slide has been populated with more detail. Zone 3A in this instance has been broken up into blocks. The white lines that you see on this map, these are the streets in this block, which in this zone, which separate the blocks that we have identified. And each block is given a unique reference number so that it can be identified. Now, all the blocks, the number of buildings in each block is identified. And once that staggering volume of work we've gone through, then from those, all of those buildings, we identify which ones are the Art Deco buildings. So this map, once we've done that exercise, this map begins to look like the map that you see on your right. So at the end of the documentation work, the Art Deco buildings in each block is identified with a different color. And the map that you see on the right, the Art Deco buildings are in the dark gray. Now, like I said, this is a staggering volume of work. A single zone like this, like Matunga Zone 3A, has 273 buildings in total. And this is only one zone that we've covered in Matunga. So it's a lot. It's extremely strenuous and time-consuming work, as you can probably infer from what I've been saying. Finally, after all that field work, we get down to actually doing the photo documentation. But even before that, there is one more step, which is we work on a survey form, it works like a checklist almost. When you go out to do any kind of photo documentation, you carry this with you. And if you see anything that's on that list, you make sure that you photograph it and it's ticked off that list. So what you see on your screen is an example of such a survey form. It has shots to be taken and key features that you should look out for when you're documenting a certain building. Here are a few examples of details that we've captured because we had the survey form handy to cross-check with. On the left, you can see Sita Sadan in Mahin with the beautiful Deco grill. Now, if you're passing, you may pass by this gate every day and not notice it. So we made it a point that it was documented. On the right is Ratan Manor. This is the metal lettering on Ratan Manor in Kolaba. And you can see that this is a very close shot. If you see this building from a distance, you won't be able to spot this lettering because it's obscured by a tree. So you really have to pay close attention when you're documenting, because otherwise this beautiful metal lettering would be missed. Here again on the left, you see Dreamland in Chembur and these beautiful concrete grills on the building. Now, this is a decrepit building. It hasn't been lived in for several years. And again, these features would be very easy to miss if we didn't have a checklist to go with. On the right is the Roji's Sojpal building in Dadar. This building is on a very busy intersection. And if you're crossing the road, chances are you're not looking up to see what buildings around you are looking like. So again, it's important to pay close attention to the features that might come through in any Art Deco building you're documenting. The pattern on this railing, the concrete railing, for instance, the inverted triangle pattern is what we call chevron, and it's a very popular Art Deco motif that is popular across the world. It's not just a Bombay Art Deco motif. Now, on the top left is Prakash. This is a sunburst in Prakash Dadar, which again is a very popular deco motif. And below that is a very, very intricate bas relief panel on the Cotton Exchange building in Kalba Devi, which details the process of producing cotton. And many of you might know cotton was the sinew of trade in Bombay, and it's one of the commodities that made Bombay such an important port of trade. On the right is Anil Kunj in Matunga. And there's a depiction of the lotus. Like I said, there are several expressions of various kinds of faiths and cultural clues that you can see in Bombay's deco. So there's the depiction of the lotus. Some might even interpret the lines that are emerging from the lotus as the sunburst. Again, this is just an unassuming residential building that you can pass by and miss completely. But our documentation ensures that this detail is documented. Next, let's shift gears to the second part of the documentation process, which is what we do after the initial photographing has been completed. As I've mentioned before, a lot of work is produced when you're out in the field, and a single neighborhood can produce as many as 1,500 photographs. Now, each of these photographs needs to be processed, and they're placed in their respective folders based on the unique reference number that has been given to each block. We have a naming convention that captures the reference number and the name of the building. So if you look at bullet point number 4, let's say you need to label a building called Noor Mahal in Matunga's zone 3A. So that would become 3A, which is a zone number. MC is the block name. The building number is 05, and the building name finally is Noor Mahal. So that becomes 3A _ MC _ 05 _ Noor Mahal, which is, and all individual buildings are named similarly so that they're easy to look for once we've cataloged. And while naming the images correctly is one facet of the cataloging work, it needs to be done alongside accurate metadata entries. And this is a necessary step that allows photographs to be located based on keyword searches, like they can be filtered by, say, elements, features, the GPS location of the building. So that's also an important thing to add when you're cataloging. This is just a flow chart of the process that I described earlier. As you can see, it begins with the zone number, then the block name is added, then all the Art Deco buildings are put into a singular folder, and they're within that folder that divided based on the naming convention. And through those photographs, we shortlist the ones that need to be processed and need to be put out there for a larger public to appreciate. The next step is to create documentation panels. Now, this is done for each individual building. These panels capture important information about the building, like the year of construction, the architect, the GPS coordinates, etc. It also contains images of some deco details along with a brief architectural description. You may notice the two maps on the top left. This is the key plan, which is a zoomed out view of the region, of the neighborhood, and the location plan, which situates the specific property that the panel is for within the larger context of the area. So for instance, if there is a famous cross section near the property, then you know vis-a-vis that cross section where the property that you are assessing lies in that context. These panels are reviewed by an architect and then independently approved by a senior architect on the team. This plan that you see on your screen is for Aurora Theatres in Matunga, which again came up in the late 1930s and is an extremely popular theatre. I'm not sure what its fate is at the moment. It hasn't screened a film in a couple of months. This is another example of a documentation panel. This is for Lakshmi Nivas in Shivaji Park. I'll just linger here for a couple of seconds so you can take a look. Now, as I said, any documentation process is, of course, you're going to be encountering challenges, and this is an extremely elaborate process. So any glitch here or there, it can derail the whole exercise. The first thing is Bombay's monsoons. I mean, even the uninitiated, I'm sure, is familiar with the rains we experience in the city. Now, for several months in the year, there is actually no documentation at all because of the rains. And we are a very small team. We typically work with architectural interns who help us out with our documentation work. So our recruitment also has to align with when it's raining in Bombay, and it's raining very often in Bombay. So I think net, I think only December through March is when the bulk of our documentation work takes place. We also require the consent and cooperation of the residents to be able to document their buildings. In most cases, like I said, they are extremely forthcoming. They are proud that their building is being showcased. They'll reach out to us and request that their building be documented or their neighborhood be documented. But in some instances, like in Matunga, for instance, our documentation team has met with some resistance. Residents might be suspicious that you're coming because you're assessing the area for redevelopment. They might be suspicious that you're coming from the government and things like that. So it demands a lot of, those situations demand a lot of time and persistence and persuasion to, reassure the resident that you're only there to be able to document the building and the importance of this exercise. And it requires people skills and some humor at times to get through and get access. Lighting is very important for documentation. You need to choose a certain time of day to photograph a building vis-a-vis its orientation to the sun. So you don't get any shadows and you get a clear shot when you're documenting a certain building. And the ongoing pandemic, of course, nobody is a stranger to the impact that it's had on lives. For 2 years, we had no documentation work at all. There was no field work. We were lucky to have carried out extensive work before the lockdown and also process it in the cloud system when we moved to a work from home arrangement. So we had material rolling to put out there and showcase in our inventory, even when the world was locked down. It's only this year that our documentation work has resumed with greater force. Like I said, the work is ongoing. As of September 2022, we have surveyed over 2,000 buildings in Bombay and found 877 of these to be Art Deco. That's more than 40%. And this has taken several man hours, for lack of a better word. since we began in 2016. And we've never done the math, but I suppose it's worth looking into how many people and how many hours went into the number that we've arrived at today. And I just want to talk a little bit about the impact of this documentation. Very often we have people writing to us in our comment section with personal anecdotes, details about buildings that we may have overlooked, or any kind of new information that may come to light. So these are just a few examples. I hope you can read some of these comments. Sabri on our Instagram post for Rout House wrote in saying, I did not know that the building was called Rout House. My late father was into professional Marathi theatre as a personal hobby, and his theatre guru Nandakumar Raut used to stay on the 3rd floor of that building. Nandakumar Raut ran a theatre company called Lalit Kala Sadhana with a group of young, well-known theatre professionals, of which my father was a part of, along with the famous Marathi playwright Suresh Khare, character artist Datta Mane, production and set designer Baba Parsekar, and many more. Your picture brought back fond memories of my childhood. Anuradha Shah writes about Champak, which is a stunning Art Deco building, and it has these blue highlights that make the Art Deco motif sort of pop on the facade. She writes, the architect of Champak was N.H. Gupte. The building design was appreciated so much that an identical building was built and stands opposite Shivaji Park Gymkhana. It's called Prabhav Vijay. Also, there's one more similar in design on MD Raut Road. This one has changed a bit after restoration. Now, that's also important information for us, because the facades of these buildings change so much over time that there's really no way to sort of authenticate what it may have looked like in its original form. So this kind of information is also very useful for us. This is Taj Manzil in Muhammad Ali Road. Someone wrote in saying, I look back at Taj Manzil with great fondness, home of my childhood best friend Rashida Vahanwati and a multitude of cousins. Paradise for any only child. I never knew then that it was an Art Deco building, and I'm happy to learn of its origins. Also delighted to know about Karani Kaka, a Baba Bora Bon that continued with us. Karani Kaka is the architect of this building, and we actually don't have his formal name. This is just what the residents of this building knew him by. And Taj Manzil, incidentally, the Vahanwati family we have been in touch with, and the family occupies the entire building to date. So this is still a family-owned building which has been occupied for decades. And their oral histories became extremely important for our documentation work. And some of the excerpts from some of these oral histories were also put out when we showcased this building on our social media. And the family wrote to us, and they were extremely thrilled and very touched that their building was showcased in such a manner and was getting such a wonderful response from people. So those are just some of our experiences. And on that note, I think I can bring my session to a close. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, you can write to us at info@artdecomumbai.in. You can also take a look at our website and see the work that we've been doing. And these are our social media handles that you can see on your screen. And those are also what you can use to write to us if you have any questions. Thank you so much.